they were facing 200% inflation at one point.
Hi, once again, everybody. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Thank you for joining us right here on the Comstock channel. Always a pleasure to visit with you. Well, today it's an honor to bring in Matthew Kruse. He's the president of Comstock Investments, and we're going to do our weekly update directly from Brazil because that's where Matthew is right now, and he's there during their growing season there. Matthew, thank you for joining us, and Happy New Year to you. Thank you for coming on board once again. Hope you had a good holiday down there.
Happy New Year. Yeah, it's here it's 80 and sunny, so
Okay.
good place to be this time of year.
Thanks for rubbing it in a little bit. Yeah, we're dealing with wintry stuff up here. Okay, so let's talk about things in Brazil. The markets have been kind of goofy here lately. The first of the year kind of turned the grain markets upside down and shook them around a little bit. What is it as far as news items that are coming out of Brazil and South America that's impacting markets? Looking at it from your perspective, where you are.
A lot of volatility going on right now. A big part of it, of course, is some of the dry weather in southern Brazil and Argentina that's kind of developed here recently, and that's kind of thrown a wrench into things a little bit, given the bulls something to chew on. I think there's a lot of skepticism on or confusion on how big a factor that's going to be. Things that we've read recently, that I'm seeing on our weather forecast that we follow, that, the next 10 days or so are going to be extremely dry in places like Rio Grande do Sul and the southernmost state of Brazil, and then Argentina. And so we've already been in this. It's already been happening for at least a week now, or more, and now they're saying it's going to be that way for another 10 days. And so basically this week and all of next week, very, very dry. And in the case of Argentina, very hot as well. And so it's one thing when it's, 75, 80 degrees and you don't get rain. It's another thing when it's 100 degrees and you don't get rain. The evaporation rates, of course, increase exponentially. And so, but it's a typical La Nina season where you get heavier, above average showers to the northern tier of Brazil, and then below average showers in southern Brazil. And we've seen that before in 2022, where production has fallen off dramatically. Now you kind of see on this map here that you threw up there, this is just for the next 6 or 7 days through January 12th. You see pretty much 3 inches in most areas in the northern growing regions, and there's pockets that it's up to 6 inches here. Another forecast looked at for the whole month of January. I mean, there's areas that are going to get 12 inches just in the month of January. And so where I'm at in Minas Gerais, I mean, it is wet. It's raining at least somewhat virtually every day. And we're in a kind of a constant overcast, a little bit of sun and back to overcast. But
and you're kind of in this area here in red there.
Correct. Right okay. In there. And then you can see as you move further south, it begins to dissipate. Paraná gets a little bit, but then you get into the very southernmost state there of Rio Grande do Sul, and they aren't, most of that, 2/3 of that state isn't seeing anything this week. And then that, of course, carries over into parts of Paraguay and then into Argentina. It's not as if the entire growing region of Argentina isn't getting anything. I think they kind of generalize it a little bit. There's parts of the Cordoba and Buenos Aires regions, which are the bigger regions, that are getting a shot of something. Maybe it's scattered showers, but like the Santa Fe region, which represents close to 20% of the production, isn't getting anything. And so the question is, well, how long is this going to last? We kind of see rain starting to come back January 20th, but it's not like it's immediate, widespread soaking showers January 20th. Like, it just slowly builds into the end of the month. And so, but yeah, that's what we're looking for. So the market, I would say they're going into this situation very well prepared in terms of soil moisture. Eric Snodgrass gave a a podcast the other day saying that their NDVI levels, which are kind of measuring the photosynthesis, were above average for this time of the year, saying, arguing that there's really no stress. Now that can change very quickly, obviously. Things can start to slide back into the other direction. And so, so that's essentially where they're at right now.
So this area in the white here in Argentina and southern Brazil, that particular spot must be what ignited the soybean market earlier this week temporarily.
Yeah,
but you say things are looking a little different now.
Even last week, I think that was a big part of it. Because it just got dry. Up until now, conditions were near perfect in Argentina, and and so it's just kind of changed here. And so now the question is, how big of an impact is this going to be? And so time will tell, right? I think if it lasts, 2 weeks, it's probably not a big deal. If it lasts 4 weeks, there's going to be some yield damage. And then the question is how much. Like we've seen in 2022, I think we saw the extreme side of that yield loss where half of Argentina lost half of their crop. They can produce 50 million metric tons or more in ideal conditions, and I think that they produced 25 million metric tons that year. And so that, I'm not saying that's where we're headed, but in theory, that's the low end of the range, right? And so if they lose, they're projected to produce 52 million metric tons. The USDA's FAS office just came out with their updated projections just like an hour or two ago, and they didn't change anything yet. And so it's still a little early, I think is what they're saying. And so, but if this goes on for another 2 weeks, they could lose 10%. But then you're talking 5 million metric tons. Now, maybe that provides some support to the market, but we see a lot of private forecasts of Brazil looking for an extra 3 to 6 million metric tons. And so it can still be offset elsewhere. So I don't know that the overall trend has changed as of right now. Of course, a week from now or 2 weeks from now, if the forecast has not changed, then those projections can obviously change as well.
Now, if you get 4 weeks further out, I mean, it's hard to believe, but we're already getting on the backside of the growing season. And by then, you won't be able to add to or subtract from the weather premium anymore on that crop, right?
Yeah, I mean, you already have close to 50% of Brazil's soybeans that are in the pod filling stage already. And so, some of the very early go-getters that planted in early September, I mean, they're already harvesting, it's a very small amount, but by the end of January here in, 2 weeks, 3 at the most, you're going to start seeing a lot more combines running already and really start to move. And so, but you're still got another few weeks left of kind of critical growing weather for the majority of Brazil's growing region, and then the focus by February, the focus is going to start to shift more to what's the planting conditions like for the second crop of corn.
Well, let's take a look at how the temperatures are cooperating then, and here's a look at let's see, this
starting last Sunday, just what the temperature anomaly is doing, and so you can see there the above average temperatures there, this in the red. That all is pretty much limited to Argentina. And, what's unusual to me is usually there's some place in Brazil, and it's usually Mato Grosso, where temperatures are above average. And we're not seeing that so far this year. Now, maybe that'll change, but we're it just seems like we're perpetually in a overcast. If it's not raining, it's still cloudy. And so it's just kind of keeping a lid on temperatures. But you're not seeing that in Argentina. And that's probably what's going to hurt the most is evaporation rates and soil moisture are going to be depleted a lot quicker in Argentina because of those temperatures.
We also have, I believe, another graphic here that we can take a look at. And what do we have here? This is Argentina. And explain this. Now we're switching over to Spanish now.
My Spanish isn't as good as my Portuguese, but The USDA's FAS office just came out with this. It's the source is Argentina's national meteorological service there, and so there on the left is just the precipitation forecast for January and February, and then on the right side is the temperature forecast for January, February, and so you can kind of see on the temperature wise, they're kind of confirming that it's going to be above average temperature here, and that's going to continue for a good part of the growing region. You look back at on the precipitation side, most of the growing region falls, I feel like, in that gray to white colored area, and that's right what they're referring to in for the in more normal conditions. And so they're certainly expecting longer term precipitation to come back to normal. And some of the maps that I've seen, I would tend to agree with that. Certainly by February, I think we'll see a return of more normal rainfall or precipitation, but it's a long time between now and then. You want it to happen January 20th versus February 1st, right? Or the yield's going to start going backwards.
Sometimes it's hard to wrap your mind around how everything is reverse of here. So you talk about some early harvesting already going on in Brazil. When would they be harvesting soybeans in Argentina? And remember, Argentina is a very long country from north to south.
Well, I mean, that's the other thing. They haven't even technically finished their soybean planting. I've seen different numbers. That they still have between 8 to 15% left to plant. I've seen private estimates where they're down to below 10%. The USDA's report, which I tend to think is a little bit of a lagging indicator, they said as much as 15% left to plant. And so the thought then is that, well, the last part of soybeans will go in late, or they won't go in at all, or maybe they'll go into something else, because of this dry spell, because they don't want to rush and go plant this last little bit in the middle of this major drought. But yeah, it's such a wide growing window. They can start in very late September, early October, and kind of go on into late January. And so it's really spread out. It's almost like they have two growing seasons, really, kind of like Brazil has two corn crops as well.
It's interesting. Since we're talking about Argentina, before we get back to Brazil, wondered what your take was, since they have their new president in Argentina. Seems like he has really turned that economy around, and now they're going gangbusters down there. Now, I wondered how that works with their relationship with Brazil, because their currency value is in the tank, historically low, right, against the dollar. But yet Argentina is the one that does most of the soy meal crushing, isn't it?
It has a big impact on the ag exports, especially, but it's a lot of that stuff is dollarized, right? Soybeans and soybean meal are kind of international dollarized commodity, and so but it's the new president that's coming in Argentina. Everything that I've been told, things are improving. Now, they were so bad, they got a long ways to get back to par, perhaps, but they were facing 200% inflation at one point. But I think, things are looking better. A lot of it is, I think, come down to cutting costs and expenses, government austerity measures, things like that. So I know our incoming administration is maybe looking to do some of the same things, pull back on government spending. And so, a lot of that's what it's come down to. Things got so rough that, politicians don't like to be the one to cut back the expenses, right? They want to get credit for giving the handouts and spending money, and so this incoming president was, I guess, willing to be the bad guy and say, we're going to cut these expenses, and I know he day one he took an axe and just started letting go a lot of departments and things like that. But it's in Brazil. It's they have their own problems. They're maybe not too dissimilar to ours, but as the dollar has been strengthening, the Brazilian real has been weakening. That's probably been, well, not probably, it's been a good thing overall for Brazilian farmers because they get more in dollarized currencies. While soybean prices, international soybean prices, have been falling here in the last 6 months, they've actually probably gone up 40% in their local currency because of this exchange rate boost. Now there's downsides to that. Obviously, if you have debt in dollar, and now it takes more Brazilian reals to pay back that debt, and so it's kind of a double-edged sword. But I think overall, it's brought, just on that one factor alone, that doesn't have a whole lot to do with the fundamentals of supply and demand. It's given a glimpse of profitability back to the Brazilian farmer. Because 6 months ago things were looking extremely bleak.
Last week we had a sizable cancellation of U.S. soybean sales to China, and they backed out of that. I hate it that they can do that, but it seems like they can get by with it every year. I just wondered if that was the case. Have they added to their purchases from Brazil now or not?
I think you should expect that going forward. You're China tries to, it just seems to buy as little from us as they can just to get to it, the next Brazil crop, which is slowly starting here now, but it'll take a little while. I mean, their peak export season is kind of April, May. It really takes off here in February, March, and then April, May is where it peaks, and then starting kind of June, July starts to taper back off again. So the first 6 months of the year, it's seasonal, is their big export period, and they pretty much dominate the global export period in the first 6 months, and it can kind of drift back to us later in the year when Brazil is sold out of their beans, and in the U.S. is pretty much the only place in town, and so. But that's a big concern now. Is China always going to be the reliable buyer that they have been in the past? Because they have their own financial concerns, and they've been growing so quickly, but their growth rate is begun to taper off, and we can't necessarily expect them to always be buying 20% more year over year the way they have been. And so, what happens when they quit buying as much, even from Brazil? Brazil isn't gonna want to stop producing. They want to slow down, and historically it's all been China's kind of come in and scooped up the remaining inventory and kind of cleaned up, and I don't know going forward if that's the case.
Boy, if you look at that soybean export chart out of Brazil historically, this goes back to 2010. Holy cow, look at how much that has risen in the last 15 years. And it looks like they probably have really plenty of room to keep growing, don't they, based on available acres?
Yeah, I mean, that's really our concern is their production increases. They're an export-driven country, and so they're gonna want to export all of their excess that they don't need, that they don't consume internally, and so you can see. I mean, it's tripled here or more, probably 350% growth in the last 15 years. It looks like from 2010 till now, and so. They had a little bit of setback from a lower crop in 2022, but and I kind of pointed out a discrepancy too. There's CONAB, I think, their influence has grown a little bit more in people looking at what their crop estimates are, and the USDA is at 104 million metric tons for the 2024 season, and CONAB's at 98. So it's not entirely insignificant. 6 million metric tons. A couple 100 million bushels or more could make a difference, one way or the other. And so I've kind of leaned towards the CONAB on that particular issue, but I'm not saying that they're always right by any means. But yeah, there's a pretty clear uptrend, and like us, Brazil kind of relies on China to be the staple buyer for them year over year.
Now, that doesn't look like they're expecting much of an increase, though, for this year. Why would that be?
Yeah, for this year, I wonder if a big part of it is China. That they're expecting China to kind of pull back the reins a little bit. I think their domestic consumption continues to rise. They've been more aggressive on their use of biodiesel production and in increasing the blend rates in that. I think they're kind of hovering between the 13 to 15%, and they've been slowly increasing those each year. And so I think that's a big part of it as well.
We had some comments on our YouTube post here recently where some people were talking about the situation with soybeans and the way the market is. And they made the comments, well, just go back to CRP. I farmed through the CRP days, and I know a lot of people have very mixed emotions about bringing back CRP. Those were the days when you kind of had to farm for the program. And it seems to me that you just kind of surrendered your market to your competitors if that was the case. What's your take on that anyway?
If your argument is to put acres into CRP to kind of boost
I can see both
prices.
sides. I was a producer and of course now I'm a reporter and everything, but I just wondered, are you an advocate of CRP, or would you not like to see CRP come back again?
I think it comes down to the individual producer, and if they have marginal acres that are not profitable, then I could see CRP being a more viable option. But no, if you can produce above trend line yields, and obviously your goal is to produce and to be profitable, then I wouldn't just give up and let's just put this in the CRP. Because I've said this before that I know it's tough, but it seems like anytime we have a pullback in overall acres, we're just succeeding that to Brazil. They're just going to expand that much, and we saw that a couple of years ago when it's like corn, at least in our area, tends to have a little bit better profitability, and when times are tight, then farmers are going to drift towards planting more corn to get that. Well, that does a couple things. Yeah, maybe it does produce a little bit of support to the soybean market, but it weighs heavily on the corn market, right? But then Brazil tends to just plant that much more. And so it's tough to get everybody together, right? I don't know. I know it's not feasible, but yeah, it would be nice if we could just say, well, this is it. This is the limit, because anytime we reduce soybean acres, it isn't like, the price is going to rebound because of it anymore. Brazil's just going to look at that. Oh, I get asked. That's probably the number one question from Brazilian farmers. What they ask me is the U.S. going to plant more or less soybean acres next year? Because if we plant less, they're just going to plant that much more. And so, no, it's not that simple. Now, on a individual basis, if you have marginal acres that can't produce trend line yields or aren't profitable, well, yeah, I think it makes sense. But the problem with that is when times are good, and we saw this in this last bull run. There are a lot of reports of people taking land out of CRP, taking land out of pasture. I know we had customers up in South Dakota telling a story about people tearing land up out of pasture. And that, I knew that wasn't going to end well. You got this land in pasture for years or decades, but corn's $7, right? So everyone wants to chase it. Well, by the time they get it going, 2 years later, the whole market dynamic outlook has shifted and changed, and now you've ruined your pasture and you're on planting marginal corn acres. And so, it's tough when you're in the middle of this and things aren't profitable, but you still got to maintain a little bit of a longer term outlook. Like, okay, this makes sense today, but 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, is this going to make sense? And so that's kind of how I look at that.
It's such a catch-22 if you implement programs like CRP, cut back on acreage in the U.S. in an effort to raise the price. If you do cut back the acres, yes, you will raise the price. Problem is, who benefits from that? Well, it's the competitors who plant more acres, like you say. Yeah. And it makes it a doubly good year for them then.
Yeah.
And it is a real catch-22. But I appreciated those comments on our YouTube video because it really did stir a lot of discussion on the sidelines here. And I thought it was really intriguing. So we welcome those comments like that. That's good stuff.
I would add that, if you ever get to talk to David Kruse again, you ask him about Plan B. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but this has been something that has been debated for a long time. And I would say Comstock has had a strong position on this. But back in, I want to say the year 2000, 2001, David Kruse really promoted what was called Plan B. And his plan was to plant more beans. And his thinking was that, we were going to take a little bit of a hit, but Brazil was going to get hurt even more. And unfortunately, people, what's going to stop Brazil? I mean, there's no secret to it. It's lower prices. And so, the way to lower prices is more production. And so, we need to maintain our soybean acres, even though it's going to hurt us a little bit, but it's going to hurt them as much as more. And so that's he could give you more detail on that, but I know that it's hard. It was impossible to get everyone together, right, and say, okay, everyone's going to do their own thing. I mean, we were aware of that, but that's the reality of the situation is to maintain or increase soybean acres.
But it's such a hot button topic, and I just thought it was an intriguing comment, especially when you have basically the lack of coming up with a new farm program too yet. It's like, I don't know if the government's going to throw a lot of money at ag programs now moving forward.
Yeah.
And it just makes it even more complicated right now. So I appreciate your comments on that. And again, I encourage everybody to weigh in on that. It was just a real unique conversation. Anyway, thank you for the update, Matthew. I appreciate that. And again, Happy New Year to you and yours in Brazil. Look forward to talking with you. Can we talk again next week?
You bet.
All right. Well, we'll plan on that. So thanks for the update. Matthew Kruse with us from Brazil. And that'll do it for this episode. For producer Brianne Jenkins, I'm Marlin Bohling. And we'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.